I'm going to button up the shift console pretty soon. I wanted to go through a couple of things that I found that you can do to fine-tune. Obviously the cables, the shift cables, so if the shift knob isn't straight forward and backward, you adjust the shift cable, and that's just unscrewing it and either loosening or tightening it, and then make sure you tighten the jam nut so this doesn't move again. And then if it's not vertical side to side, it's the crossgate cable. So those two things are kind of obvious, and you just set it so that the stick is vertical. The reverse lockout it's not tricky, but there are several things to adjust. So here's what I did. The first thing I did is there's a little ball end on the cable that pulls on the reverse lockout. So you just make sure that the ball end is in there, and there's a spring in between. And then it's probably not going to show up, but there's this cable here that it's an outer sheath that the inner sheath rides in. So basically there's three adjustments really. There's the distance that this outer sheath is held in to this stop. So that will adjust how far down the reverse lockout collar has to sit. Then there's this collar with the set screw in it. This adjusts obviously where this collar sits after you've adjusted the outer sheath. And then there are the little tiny nuts. And basically what you do is, what I found was that I adjusted the sheath down all the way. That allowed for very, it allows the collar to, the shift reverse lockout to be all the way up, and then you meet the reverse lockout with this collar with the set screw. Now, if you pull this guy too low, that forces the reverse lockout collar to be lower, and if you pull up too much on the reverse lockout collar, well, that little ball comes out of the reverse lockout lever. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that this reverse lockout collar moves as little as it needs to move out of the way of the nut, but not so much that it pulls itself out of the reverse lockout tab. And so really you want this guy to be as high up close to the shift knob as possible, and as little motion in this guy as you possibly can have. I mentioned in the last video that this was rattly. So what I did is I put a little piece of felt in between the collar and the lockout mechanism, and then I wrapped the shaft itself with a couple of cycles of electrical tape, and now hopefully it's not going to rattle when I'm driving around. If it does, I'll do a little more. So there's that. Then the last part is making sure that the reverse lockout is at the right height, and all you want to do is you want to make sure that the reverse bolt head hits the reverse lockout and then goes smoothly into first gear. So that's basically finding that left shift gate before reverse, and you want it to stop there. So that's what that's doing. So you adjust this guy up and down until you find that stop. It would be nice if there was a stop on the right side as well, on the 5th, 6th gate, just so you had a kind of a hard stop instead of the transmission doing the stopping. I've had other cars where that's an adjustment. You can adjust that height, and that's kind of nice because then you have a hard stop, and you also can eliminate a lot of the motion in that gate because it really stops pretty close to where that gate starts, and so you can't go that extra distance. This one doesn't have that, so anyway. That's the reverse lockout adjustment. Those are the things that you do for the reverse lockout adjustment. Not too hard. So the first thing you do is adjust the cable so that the stick is vertical. Then you adjust the reverse lockout collar, so you move the lever out of the way. Then you adjust that stop so you can still find first gear. And then you move that collar out of the way, and you should be able to find reverse. That one actually you don't. There's no stop for that side either. But the transmission stops you again, just like it does in 5th and 6th. Those are all kind of standard adjustments. One of the things that I noticed when I first installed this is you can see that in the neutral position or in the 3/4 position, the knob can kind of set. See that? And what's going on is, first of all, the transmission allows that. There's enough slop in the transmission. It's not in the cable, it's not in the ShiftR, it's at the transmission where it can stop on either side. But the thing I want to make note of is the ShiftR has a wound up spring. I'm pointing to it here. That's the spring that helps the ShiftR find this neutral position. It springs into that position. So you can see when I push on the lever that this spring moves out of the way, and when I push in this direction, there's another spring. Let's see if I'm not sure if it's real clear. Well, you can kind of, yeah, it's right here. This spring moves out of the way. But when it's in neutral, there's a little space there where that spring is not pushing on this spring isn't pushing on this bar, this spring isn't pushing on this bar. There's a little gap. I want to eliminate that gap. So what I did is I went to the hardware store and I found some standoffs, and this one is 632 thread, which is pretty close to the diameter of this spring. And so what I want to do is I want to put this standoff on this guy, and I want to put the other standoff on this side. And now there's tension on the spring all the time. And it still stays a little bit, but way less. And so now it really wants to find a central position and doesn't have that kind of dead spot in it. It doesn't affect the force of the shifter noticeably, but it absolutely makes a difference in how much play there is in that central position. So that's a little tip. I'll run it for a little while, see if it rattles or not. Those guys are held in just by gravity as they are. But you know, I could put a little Loctite in there, or I could put a set screw in the side of it and just screw it down so it grabs onto the spring. The other thing I thought about doing was just bending the spring. I don't want to make it an irreversible change, and it's really hard to get a good grip on those little springs with a pair of pliers because there's not a lot of space in there. So I think I'll work like this for now, and see if it rattles. If it rattles, I'll have to try and put something so that it doesn't get to move around on the spring. So that's another little trick I found. I had to, one last thing, I noted in the last video that the holes didn't line up. They don't, so I took a Dremel and I opened up the holes a little bit, and now they'll line up.